Welcome to Carrying Wayward, a supernatural podcast for fans who aren't ready to let go and newcomers to the series who are ready to jump in. I'm Marie Guru.
And I'm Drew Schulman. In this episode, we're diving into Supernatural Season 8, Episode 19, Taxi Driver. Let's get this show on the road.
They changed Zoom, and I am very distraught over this. I'm really upset about this.
What changed?
I used to have on my thing at the bottom, there used to be record, do this, all of the actions that you would do as a host. It's all gone. It's all under one button, host tools. So now if I want to record, I don't hit record. I have to go to host tools and then record, or more and then record. And I'm just why? Why do I have to do this? It used to be right there. It used to be right there, Drew.
That's so stupid. I hate when you, rearrange things arbitrarily because we thought it would be better this way for no reason.
Not to get into the undiagnosed autism of it all, but I am very distraught over the change of UI of Zoom.
I'm also a bit distraught today. Can I share?
Yes, of course.
The title of this episode, Taxi Driver? Given that we just had Freaks and Geeks, which we, if you I'm assuming, have listened to our last episode. If this is your first episode, welcome. This is a weird rant, but you'll learn.
Imagine. Imagine this is somebody's first Carrying Wayward episode.
Naming an episode Taxi Driver, which carries the weight with it from being, attached to, a well-known film. And then the only reference is that the Reaper that's in the episode for 6 whole minutes happens to be a cab driver. What?
But is it though? Is it the only reference? Because the thing is, from what I understand, it's also about somebody devolving, right? It's a movie about somebody devolving, but also seeing the environment around them devolve. And I think that we do see some of that in this episode, right? When it comes to Sam being in purgatory, Sam being in hell, and also we're seeing Benny devolving through all of this, right?
Maybe if I watch Taxi Driver one day, I will come back and apologize to this episode.
I personally feel you can't say that it has nothing to do with a movie that you haven't seen, is all I'm saying. It feels weird to me.
This week, patrons and coffee supporters got to hear us answer the question, have you ever taken or given a ride to an interesting character on the supporter-exclusive Impala Talk feed? You can go to carryingwayward.com to support us and claim your perks.
Drew, with the energy today being very unhinged already, can you please give us a recap of this episode?
Count me down.
3, 2, 1, good buddy.
We have Kevin getting a little antsy. He's figured out the second task, or the trial, but now he has Crowley in his head screwing with him. Maybe, allegedly, we don't know. Maybe he's going crazy. Maybe Crowley's actually there. I have thoughts. Sam and Dean show up to help him. They learn about the next trial, which involves going to get someone out of hell and back to heaven. And then, of course, it just so happens to be the Reaper they find who helps them do this, reveals, oh yeah, Bobby's in hell. And they're like, wait, what? So they decide not only is this a trial, but it's a save Bobby. So Sam has to go alone because he has to solve the trial. And then Dean's all like, I'll just be up here with Kevin cooking for him. Crowley shows up, kills the taxi driver. Sam has no way out. They send Benny in. Benny gives his life to go back to purgatory and ultimately save poor Sam and Bobby. And then Crowley shows up to stop Bobby from getting to heaven, but then Naomi shows up to save him. But I still think she's a bitch. Time.
They send Benny is doing a lot of work in this recap.
We will discuss it more thoroughly in a recap sense. They send Benny.
This episode was written by Brad Buckner and Eugenie Ross Lemming, directed by Guy B., and it originally aired on April 3rd, 2013. As we can probably already tell, this episode is pretty pivotal in terms of the season-long arc. So we're going to be taking a much closer look at that in story time. There's a lot of big things, capital B, capital T, that are happening. We can basically tell at this point that we're getting close to the season finale.
I definitely had my suspicions that Benny would not make it past this season. I did not think he would be lost this, I don't want to say, this far from the ending of the season. I assumed if he was going to go out, he would go out with a bang closer to the end. He definitely made a fucking impression today.
Kevin is able to decipher the second trial, and it's to rescue a soul from hell, which is when we find out, like you said, that Bobby's soul has been in hell and not in heaven. And so obviously they decide to go and rescue him. It feels like a good win to have under your belt.
When they first said it, I was like, oh, are they just going to go and like arbitrarily pick someone? Are they going to figure it? So like to have it be someone that we as an audience cares about is such a smart idea.
Kevin is also scared that Crowley knows where he is, and Crowley does end up kidnapping him or maybe murdering him. It's unclear, but definitely disappearing him.
I don't think Crowley got him. Kevin ran away because we see in that last moment where he actually sees Crowley, the windows shatter, but then when the boys get there, the windows are intact.
I think that you should definitely make a prediction about that.
I'm predicting that this is all in his head. It's a curse of dealing with the tablets for so long, getting to him, and he has just run away on his own. His mother is still alive. Crowley didn't kill her, and Crowley has no idea where he is actually. And they're gonna go confront Crowley, and Crowley's gonna be like, "I didn't take him. What are you talking about? I have no idea where the fucking kid is."
Sam successfully completes the second trial, but not before Dean has to decapitate Benny to send him to purgatory so that he can help Sam get out of purgatory.
Never would have predicted that being how they handle this. Like the entire time, like as soon as was oh no, the Reaper's dead. How are they gonna get him out? And like I started putting the pieces. I'm like, no, that's a terrible plan. Don't do that.
They did. And Benny doesn't actually make it out.
He chooses not to leave.
Bobby says, if they give me a rocking chair up there, referencing heaven, I'm raising hell. And I just need us to remember this.
Oh no.
I just need us to remember this.
Oh, I'm not sure which part of that I'm more worried about, but all of it sounds amazing.
In this episode, Naomi is working really, 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 really hard to try to get Dean over on her side. She's having a conversation with him where she is shamelessly lying to him about what she did to Cass, and she's actively trying to make Dean doubt Cass and Cass's sanity.
I will repeat what I said during Live Watch. Naomi joins the ranks of angelic beings who need to be punched square in the dick as soon as possible.
During that conversation, Naomi says, you haven't warded this place against us, meaning the houseboat, the safe houseboat. She continues, I know you're hoping Castiel will return to you. I admire your loyalty. I only wish he felt the same way.
God, I hate her. I hate her so much. I hate her. Oh, like Zachariah was a dick to the boys, but Naomi's like trying to play them against each other, and I'm not a fan.
Basically, what she's also trying to do is to make sure that Dean is on her side. Because if Dean is on her side, then
Cass would come back to her side as well.
Exactly. This week, our theme is passage, which is basically crossing from one place to another. It's this idea of like going over or through something. And it's also like a means of crossing. It comes from Latin passare, meaning to step, to walk, or to pass. And the reason why we picked this theme this week, actually, is because of just like how many transitions there are in this episode. Like not only in the way that they have to like physically go between places, but also a lot of really memorable, emotional transitions too.
An episode where we have to say goodbye to Benny seemingly on a permanent basis is already hard enough. But then to also bring back Bobby for like a final goodbye, like Sam makes a very literal passage this week as per our theme, entering both purgatory and hell. In purgatory, Sam is faced with the reality that Dean has been stuck in for years and gets to see firsthand what kind of place he was stuck in and how it would affect Dean since his return, how it's affected him. And while we only really see a few like minor confrontations with other things in purgatory, Sam seems to understand pretty quickly how awful of a place it is.
For sure. I mean, like purgatory is a liminal space, quite literally, actually. It's the space between earth and hell. Very few humans have ever gone there. And it's also a place where almost everything that matters on Earth, and even in hell, arguably, is just completely stripped from the life that exists in the place. And that's why, at the beginning of the season, Dean describes purgatory as pure, because he doesn't need to mask anything when he's there. Like, he can literally be himself. And the reason that I bring this up in Sam's section is because there's no way that Sam could have possibly understood this if he hadn't been to purgatory himself. And I think that this like physical passage in this liminal space that is purgatory allows Sam to pivot emotionally to a space where he understands better what Dean has been through during his time there.
I almost wish we could have seen Sam experience more in purgatory, because I feel like by the end we understand what Sam now knows, but I would have liked to have seen him experience it and like really come to terms with it.
I also think to a certain degree that seeing so little of it and already understanding is also pretty powerful.
Speaking of seeing very little of, we get very little time in hell, but like the little time we do get as an audience, like it's a really heavy selection of tortured souls, and they were like legitimately scary. Like it's the first time in a while the show actually freaked me out. And given Sam's past in the cage and knowing what he knows of Dean's time being tortured, like being free in a sense to walk these halls like must be horrifying. Until now, hell has been a place where like someone you knew was being held or you yourself were in trouble, but like he's just seeing it from the outside looking in almost the way we as an audience do. Culminating with his, encounter with Bobby, who is shockingly not broken, which is, good sign for Bobby, as he could be, but still seems to be all there, which is impressive. Like I think it does a really good job of showing us how horrifying the place is and how strong Bobby is.
I do want to come back to something that you said, because I think that we tend to forget that Sam's also been in hell before, right? Like we tend to think about Dean a lot being in hell, but Sam has been in hell. And like, of course, he was in Lucifer's cage, so like arguably the worst place in hell, and also maybe not representative of the rest of it, right? Like I think it could have been interesting to go into that a little bit during an episode that, perhaps should focus on Sam because it's one of his trials, right? And there's also the fact that this is the first time that Sam sees Bobby since he was a ghost. And we know that Ghost Bobby wasn't like actual Bobby, right? Like it was a devolving version of Bobby. So I can imagine Sam being a little weary of like, who is he going to be this time? And so he has to very, very quickly adapt and transition to like the kind of relationship and conversation that he would have with this version of Bobby.
Again, like this is where I wish like we could have had a longer episode or more time, because I would have loved to have seen, I would have liked to have seen a wearier Bobby. Like I feel like, while it's played for laughs, the like very like, I know a bunch of shit about you that no one else knows, and like Bobby clicks and goes, oh, you're clearly Sam. I think I would have loved to have seen like a little more of like a worn out, beaten down Bobby, and then like the actual moment of hope when he goes like, oh shit, this actually is my Sammy. Sam has a good look at purgatory and of hell, but most importantly, he gets to understand Benny and like the journey that him and Dean had been on. After having experienced purgatory and now having Benny by his side, like Dean's dad, he basically gets to have a mini version of the Dean story. Sam really sees the man Benny is and was. Not a vampire who happened to be good for some ulterior motives, not a monster with a bit of good side, but like truly a genuine person who cares about his brother.
He moves from an emotional space where he barely tolerates Benny to one where he owes him his life, right? And he understands that like the reason why he owes him his life is at least in part because of his love for Dean. And I just think that like it's a huge thing for Sam and for Dean, actually, because it moves both of them into a place where they have more understanding for each other.
For all the good we've talked about Sam in his more open and understanding way of like, not all monsters are monsters, like there's a gray area here. He never really put Benny in that box of like, okay, maybe he's good. It was sort of just like, you help my brother gives you a break. I won't, be too much of a bitch about it. But like he literally gets to see it here and understand and come to that understanding. And like, oh, it is just such a, like, I'm so, like, I hate that it cost us Benny, but I'm so happy to see Sam and Dean have that connection now because of this.
I always think that they're in a better place when they're like working together. So it's always nice to see that. I also do want to mention that Sam has another very significant passage in this episode, and that's from one trial to two trials. And like, we know that after the first trial, he was like broken in ways that even Castiel couldn't fix. So my question then is going to be, what exactly will the second trial do to him?
I lingered on this very briefly while watching the episode with everybody, and I was just sort of like, okay, like the immediate act of reading the spell didn't seem to do much different than the first time. So my hope is like maybe it'll just continue to be coughing up blood and a little bit of weakness. But then there's always the like, okay, it took a while for it to really kick in. Like, where is this going? And like, how bad can it get? Will it get so bad that he won't be able to do the third trial safely or easily? If we move to Dean for a bit in this episode, I feel weird that Dean gets like sidelined pretty quickly this week due to Sam feeling he needs to go it alone for the sake of the trial, which I understand.
We'll talk about the critical side of this episode in critical time because I have thoughts.
But while he does his best to keep himself busy and distracted by taking care of Kevin, and I do mean like taking care, he's cooking for him even, it's almost like Dean is getting more comfortable with being comfortable and sees the shit state Kevin has been left in. Not disparaging Garth's boat, but rather the state of living Kevin finds himself in himself. Dean has a new appreciation for home-cooked meals and wants to share it and bring some of this comfort he's learned to achieve, and afford himself to others.
I agree with this. I think that there might be something else also, because we haven't really talked about this yet, but I think that Dean is trying to get Kevin to go from like constantly complaining about being a prophet to just kind of like accepting it and making the best of it. And to be clear, okay, I completely understand why Kevin is acting the way that he is. And, if I were in his shoes, I would probably, certainly, definitely very much be kicking and screaming as well. Putting that aside, I think it's important to remember that Dean has had to accept at such an early age that his life was just never going to turn out the way that he hoped. I wonder if he's not a little bit annoyed with the way that Kevin is just so reluctant to accept it. Like, he really is kind of treating him like he's a bit of a drama queen. He's like, oh, come on, okay, like, just eat some vegetables, And so I see his actions in this episode as him, like, trying to help Kevin feel more comfortable with the state of his life, while also being like, oh my God, you're so annoying kind of thing. And I don't know if that's just me, but maybe that's me projecting. I don't know, but I see it. I see it. I wonder if anybody else does.
It is there. Like, I definitely see it. And I think there is like, you're right. There's like the two sides of the coin of the like, I would like you to be more involved in this and like see what you're doing, the good you're doing, and like find, a balance, but also like, oh my God, I just need you to eat some food so you don't die on me, Jesus.
Right. It's like, I'm trying to keep you alive. It's like me to my plants.
This is the worst Tamagotchi ever.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Luckily, my Tamagotchi never had the key to saving the world, so.
I never had a Tamagotchi, actually.
You were missing out.
I know.
So, obviously, we need to discuss the call to Benny. A call I immediately saw on screen and got so much pain in me. Like, Dean is metaphorically walking a road he knows is dangerous to him. He's already said goodbye to Benny, knowing that while he still loves Benny, and Benny still loves him, that their being together is not conducive to each other's lives. And despite all of that, Dean knows Benny is the only person he can turn to at this moment, and just how incredibly difficult a favor he is asking of him.
Oh my God. Again, I find that like favor is doing a lot of work here. Like, Benny says, I think he says something like that. He's like, wow, and when the Winchesters ask you for a favor, they're not kidding around, right? Like,
Yes.
Just like, that's such an understatement. Like, unbelievable. And the reality of that is that I don't really know what to say, right, about this whole thing. Like, When people say that like the only person who never betrayed Dean was Benny, like this is what they mean. Like this is what they mean, right? Like in an episode where Naomi has Dean like questioning Cass's loyalty to him, no one can ever question Benny's loyalty to Dean. Like this is like it has become one of those things that I just don't talk about online ever because there's always going to be somebody who says something disparaging about Benny and I'm like just no, not today, Satan. Like absolutely not. Anyway, I think that like in this case, the relationship between Dean and Benny goes from like still existing in some kind of like in between state of not really together, cue casual by Chapel Rowan, but not done with each other either, to like will likely never see each other ever again.
Oh my god, yeah, it is just. I don't even want to imagine someone saying something disparaging about Benny right now because I think I would go off on them.
Well, speaking of Benny, what are your thoughts?
Benny is the most perfectest man ever. He has been having a hard time adjusting. Like, after choosing a new path in life and walking it as best he could feel how hard it was and how it was not working for him. And getting a call from Dean, even if the task at hand was one so incredibly difficult, he jumped at the opportunity to help Dean, even if it was one final time. Like, he just cares that much.
I do want to point this out here. Benny's last act on Earth was to sacrifice himself for the man that he loves. And I really hate to say this, but this is a really messed up two nickel kind of situation.
Again, not knowing exactly what happens with Cass at the end of all this, except for the bits I do know, I can kind of see where this is going, and I hate it.
Yeah. Oh my God. Anyway.
Benny's choice to stay in purgatory reminds me of Cass's choice that he also chose to stay in purgatory. He thought he was ready to leave, but upon reaching Earth and seeing what it would take for him to live happily and comfortably, he realizes he isn't ready. You know, as Dean said, he did not burn the bones, thus leaving the door open, and I think there's a world, even if I predict it won't be in the show's current 15 seasons, that Benny could return after taking the time to actually contemplate life on Earth and what would it be for him.
I absolutely hate the parallel with Cass. Thank you very much. So that's like two of Dean's boyfriends who have stayed in purgatory despite Dean's expressed wishes. And I don't need any more nickels. Thank you. Thank you. To kind of respond briefly to what you're saying about maybe Benny wanting to return, like Benny made it really clear that what made Earth attractive to him, especially like as he grew and got to know Dean, was like the anchors that he had there, emotional anchors, right? So that's why he went for his great great grandniece or whatever. That's why he was reaching out to Dean so much. But like the reality is that like what else does he have on Earth? Like I just don't know that this is something that he would want to come back to Earth if he could.
I know you're right, and I don't want to admit it, but I know you're right. And again, if this is a true series wrap on Benny, that I think it is, he was fantastic. And while it's sad for me, and I'm sure for so many other fans, and for Dean more than a million times, I'm glad we had him at all.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about before about how Benny is a tragic character, like in the true sense of the term, right? And I think that this episode was like his own swan song where he goes from earth to purgatory and like that passage itself is pretty final. I find this episode to be a really good example of inconsistency in characterization. We've talked about this a little bit this season, but I find this episode to be so loud in that sense that I think we really need to point it out here. And for me, it specifically has to do with two things. It has to do with Bobby and Hell, okay? At the end of season 6, on The Man Who Would Be King, we're showed that Crowley gave Cass a tour of hell, which he said he was remaking in his own image. And it was basically like one very long line. And then when you got to the top, you went right back to the end, right? It was funny, it was witty, it was very Crowley. Now in this episode, hell is showed to be a lot more hell-like, like what we had seen in the very early seasons, right? In seasons 1 through 5. You know, there's cells where people are being tortured. And I think that this could be explained by saying, well, maybe Crowley lied to Cass in order to get in his good graces, which would make a lot of sense, right? Although Crowley is one to honor his deals, right? So I'm not sure how much I would buy that personally. We could also say, well, maybe part of hell is the infinite line, but then another part is still that the souls in cages getting tortured. And yeah, that could very well work as an in-universe explanation. But either way, I think what annoys me is that I have to fill in the blanks. And it also creates a climate on this show, in the narrative of this show, where I never know if I can trust what's being said to me as a viewer. And that's going to be a big thing later in the series. The second thing that annoys me is in terms of how Buck Lemming wrote Bobby's reaction to Dean being friends with a vampire. And I do want to read the exchange because it's a lot, right? So this is the moment where Bobby goes to kill Benny and Sam goes like, Bobby, no, wait, why? And he goes to Benny, why are you here? Dean sent me. And Bobby says, Dean, not my Dean. And Sam has to tell Bobby that no, he's a buddy of Dean's, Bobby. A buddy? And then that's when Benny says, like, a good buddy. And Bobby answers, a friggin' vampire? Well, you two really went off the rails while I was gone, didn't you? And there are two things here. Because on a surface level, I think that Bobby would want to understand the circumstances behind the friendship before judging. Like, I'm thinking back to the early seasons, and Bobby still loved Sam after he started the apocalypse. And he loved him so much that he, like, stabbed himself while possessed instead of Sam in early season 5. And you're telling me that this is his reaction to Dean befriending a vampire? That he would be saying, not my Dean? I do not buy it. Simply do not buy it. And if we just go a little bit below surface level, right? Like, this dialogue makes it clear that there's more than friendship between Dean and Benny, right? Like, I'm sorry, but like a good buddy, like, please. And we've talked multiple times on Carrying Wayward about like how Sam's reaction to Benny felt really homophobic this season in context, right? Even though we don't view Sam as homophobic. Well, I think that the same thing is happening here to Bobby. Like, I don't see Bobby as homophobic at all. But this reaction really feels homophobic. And I don't know. Like, I don't know that I have a real conclusion to this, but I think that, you know, this is when we're really starting to see that different writers have completely different agendas and completely different views when it comes to this universe and these characters, and the difference is only going to get bigger at this point.
I fully agree. I feel like the hell stuff is a lot of that, like, I could fill in the blanks, or like, yes, that's the front half of hell and the back half, the behind the doors, is still the old school, or maybe Crowley's gone off his. There's 1,000 like head canons to cover that up. But Bobby, no, that's not my Bobby. No, even in the moment, like, it felt so weird.
This week we have a second message from Nell. Before we listen to it, we want to remind you to send us a 3-minute voicemail, and to respond to anything we discussed today or to ask us a question, you can use the recording app on your phone and email us the recording at carryingwayward@gmail.com. I also want to mention that Nell started their own podcast with another one of our listeners, Lucia, and I just listened to the first episode today, and it was honestly such a joy. So if you're interested, you can look up Totally Normal About That wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi, Carrying Wayward. It's Nell again. I want to talk about season 7, episode 10, Death's Door, and some things about memory. So, obviously, this is an episode that's all about memory. That's the theme. But I want to talk a little bit about the way we think about memory and how we prioritize sort of memory, almost over experience a little bit. So, like, these days I think a lot of people complain like everybody goes to a concert and they just film the whole thing, they're not actually experiencing it. Or like you go somewhere and you take a million pictures and stuff, and so you sort of lose out on some of the experience. I think those are valid, and like I get why people want to save those things and save memory, but I also think that speaks a lot to how, as a society, we value the memory of something over the thing itself. So you see that when people, like, you know, they take their really small kid to Disney World or whatever, and someone's like, well, they're not even going to ever remember this. Like, why would you do that? And I just want to say, like, I do some research on dementia, and I have a family history of Alzheimer's and dementia. And so I really want to sort of say that I think sometimes things can be something for the sake of them. Like, we can have good experiences even if they aren't going to be remembered, and that shouldn't be the most important thing. Like, the memory of them shouldn't matter the way that the feelings in the moment and the joy matter. And, like, again, not that memories don't matter, but, like, you were talking, Marie was talking a little bit about the small moments that we see in Bobby's memory. And I think those are so important and sort of indicative of this idea that I'm talking about, because I sort of don't know that Bobby would have thought about those particular moments very frequently, just like in his conscious daily life. He might not have like totally forgotten about them, but they wouldn't have been super present, like callback to memories all the time. But we see then when he's in this subconscious place, how important those events were, how momentous they were for the feelings they gave him in that moment. And so I just sort of want to know your thoughts on this idea that like a thing can exist and matter because it exists, not because we later remember it. And again, just because of my background working with dementia communities, like we do a lot of thinking about that, of like we still want to give people good experiences and happy times even if they won't remember them later. So yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts. As always, keep up the great work.
Nell, again, thank you for an amazing voicemail. I love this. Like, I am a big sucker. Like, one of my favorite dumb things to do is like sit with a friend I haven't seen in like months or even years in some cases, and just like swap stories and be reminded of the most like asinine little things that we did one time that like I could never describe. Like, you can't even describe it to somebody and make it even sound like semi-understandable or appealing, but because it is linked to a memory that you can like go back to those feelings and emotions and like how you felt in those moments, I think is what makes a memory so important. Like, to use your example of like parents who bring their kids to Disney who like would be too young to remember it, like that's a thing that they as a family will share forever and be able to go back to. Even if the kid can't remember it, they'll be able to laugh over a Christmas dinner about the time their kid got scared of Goofy and ran behind one of them. And like, the kid doesn't remember that, but it'll become a core thing for them as a family. And I still think those moments are so important. So to have Bobby, and like I linger on that final moment of him making the popcorn and listening to Sam and Dean argue about who's the best action movie hero, that to me is one of those moments where it's like, you can't describe that to somebody and make it sound like an appealing moment of like, I was making popcorn and these two boys who are basically my adopted children were arguing about Chuck Norris. And it's like, okay, yeah, I don't get it. But it will forever be something important to Bobby when it does come up in his memories, whether it be literally his last memory or when he happens to see that movie come up in the TV guide once in a blue moon back in the day. So I really do see this and the value in memory in those moments. And I feel like I can go on tangents forever on this one because I love this idea of the subject, because I love little moments like that. They're so amazing. So to see them in Bobby like this is just, it's really magical, and it does so much for him as a character and for us as an audience.
Nell, thank you so much for making us think about this. I don't know if I've talked about this on the podcast, but I have a grandparent right now who we are actively working to get diagnosed with some form of either dementia or Alzheimer's. And it is pretty advanced, unfortunately. There's a lot of circumstances surrounding that. By the time this comes out, I'll have already been and come back. But I am going to be heading to France to go see her. And one of the questions was, well, do you want to go see her from me, right? Like that's something that my family asked me, because I realized that even if I went to see her, she probably wouldn't remember it after a little while. And I decided that it was important for me and for my son to go see her, because even if she wasn't going to remember necessarily like the specifics of the visit, she would enjoy the moment and experience the moment. And so would we, right? And that felt very important to me. Of course, it would be Nell who would make me cry on this podcast. I definitely resonate with this idea of like memory versus experience. And I think that experiences, even if they don't necessarily live in our brain, they live in our body, right? Like children who are too young to remember certain things, still their body carries traces of it, whether for good or for bad. Like I strongly believe that. And I think it's the same for people who are towards the end of their life. Thank you very much for making us think about that. So what is your reflection and call to action this week, Drew?
It's taking the time to properly reflect on things, to sit with myself and reflect and think. I know we do it every week here in this context of the show. We literally have a call to action and a time for reflection. But sometimes I can use some alone time to sit and think and process and work through things. And I don't think I give myself that time enough. So I am actively calling myself to like cut out 10 minutes at the end of the day and just turn off the screens and just, it was the other night, it was sitting in the rain, it was just the perfect spot to just sit and think and absorb and reflect. It was perfect.
That's lovely. Thank you so much for sharing. This episode reminds me that transitions are hard, right? Like change is hard because you're going from something that is known to something that's unknown. And I know that like a few weeks ago, I said on this podcast that I didn't win a single award that I applied for, but one actually came through shortly after we recorded that episode. I am honestly so happy about it, and yet I am still quite apprehensive. I don't know what it's gonna be like. Like, I don't know how the money is gonna be dispersed to me. Like, I know that I have to give the funder a report every 6 months, but I don't know what that's going to look like, and I don't know if there's any other obligations that I'm going to have. Like, do I have to attend certain things? I don't know. I'm just feeling called to remember that even good transitions can be very, very hard. This was Carrying Wayward, a supernatural podcast produced by Rochelle Castellano, hosted by Drew Schulman and Marie Vigourou. Thank you to everyone supporting us on Ko-fi or Patreon, especially our bunker supporters, Elle, Jeremiah Thomas, and Simone. We'd also like to thank Jake Lionheart for our music and Jacqueline Tucci for additional sound editing. Head over to carryingwayward.com to become a patron or a Ko-fi subscriber, and for our merch store and our socials. And write us a review on Apple Podcasts. Carry on, our wayward friends.